Welcome everybody. So I'm going to transition us over to, so I hope you all can see the overlay that Locke has made for us. So as you all know, my name is Andrew Schultz. I'm a graduate student at Georgia Tech, and I am studying some about elephant biomechanics, and I will let Lynn introduce herself.
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Lynn Von Hagen. I'm a research fellow at Auburn University, and I'm studying human-elephant coexistence in the Kasagawa Wildlife Corridor of Kenya. And I think that's going to be part of our elephant topic for tonight.
Yes, and so would you tell a little bit about the elephant in the Zoom? So what is the picture of the elephant? Where did you take that?
Yeah, my study area is in the southeastern part of Kenya in East Africa. This elephant was hanging out, taking a dust bath. I pretty much stay on a ranch called Rukinga Ranch, which is part of the corridor, made up of 13 different community ranches. I get the distinct pleasure of getting to go out all the time on the ranch with my camera and taking lots of shots of elephants so we can identify different individuals.
Because you mainly work with bulls, right?
The entire elephant population, there's about 12,000 plus in this area of Kenya. It's actually the largest area for the largest population in the country. And they move back and forth between Tsavo East and Tsavo West National Park, which is why there's a lot of conflicts in this area because elephants are moving between those two areas of safety. So bulls are easier to catalog, but we do look at all the different elephants family groups as well. So we know more of the individual boys.
So what is, I guess one of the things I'd like to start with is how did you get involved in doing elephant research? Like what kind of brought you to this space or this community?
Sure. Well, I've been fascinated with elephants since I was a little girl. I talk about, I've got a picture hanging on my wall that nobody can remember where it came from when I was a kid. So I've just always been fascinated by elephants. After I finished my bachelor's degree in zoology, I was really hoping to work with elephants, but as you can imagine, those jobs and kind of graduate positions are really rare. But I got very lucky and got to work with Dr. Bruce Schulte, who is amazing, at Western Kentucky University. So I did my master's work there on this project, which is supported by the International Elephant Foundation and Earthwatch. So we entertain about 6 different teams of citizen scientists, volunteers every year to help us with our work. And then I ended up getting a PhD position at Auburn and got to very luckily continue on the same project and just pursue different lines of research. So really kind of tied the 2 degrees together, which is kind of a nice, rare blessing.
Didn't you move areas though between the two? Did you go from yeah, I think we got Maya's auto host, so we have 80 people. Welcome everybody. Lynn and I are talking some about elephants. Hello. And yeah, so when you moved from Western Kentucky to Auburn, did you stay in the same region of Africa doing elephant research?
Yeah, actually got to stay in the same region, and that may have been what maybe a more attractive candidate has already had a research project that several different agencies and groups have been working on already. So we had already established that we had partial funding already. So I did get to kind of just flow right through, but definitely had to of course, kind of leave one avenue of research and transition into another one. Went really from looking at different types of deterrent methods to keep elephants from crop raiding into doing similar work, but looking at the more sociological aspect of it, really getting into the community, working with the farmers, looking at attitudes, behaviors, and looking at elephant movements and how we can, kind of predict where to put different types of fencing deterrents and things like that.
Yeah. So one of my favorite topics about this is just all of, and I'm sure chat might have heard of some of them, but could you talk some about the like differences in mitigation tools? Because we've talked some about this personally, but how mitigation is different in South Africa versus in Kenya, and every single region is different, and kind of some of the things like, I know you just had work published, congratulations, on the chili fences. So could you talk some about that and some of the other things like the bee fences that people might not be aware of?
Sure. This is a huge topic, so we could spend probably an hour on it.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest lessons that, most people learn when they work with different types of mitigation is there is no one-shot solution that works in every different area. So what works in one village might not work in another. What works in one country might not work in another. And what we tried to do in our first study was actually look at and compare some of the different type of techniques. So traditionally what people do is, use whatever they have around the house. The communities that we work in are really impoverished. People do not have running water. They don't have electricity. They're really struggling to feed their families. And that kind of goes back, just to regress for a bit about human-elephant conflict and why it's so detrimental. You're working in some of the poorest communities. These people cannot afford to have their crops destroyed because it's what they're going to use to feed their family. So it's a very different situation between some of these, large agricultural farms that are trying to protect crops versus a small shareholder farm who has, half an acre of land. He plants corn every year and that's all he does. So that's one of the reasons we really try to help people. You can almost understand from a Western viewpoint, we see elephants as wonderful, big, fluffy, well, not fluffy, but adorable
gentle
creatures.
giants. Yeah, gentle giants. Yeah.
Well, in many parts of Africa, coexistence is tough because of these different types of conflicts. So you can imagine, we struggle with deer eating our tomatoes. Imagine going out into your garden and finding a 7-ton elephant in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and when you think about this, right? So like chat, what's important to know is these elephants can eat hundreds of pounds of food a day, right?
Yeah.
And so when you think about a tomato, and that's a single elephant. So if you have a herd, right? And I know you're going to go more into this, Lynn, but it's just it's like almost a strange scale because we can't even conceptualize it in the United States because all of our mammals are tiny.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the issue is some farmer can lose their entire livelihood in one evening. And of course, it's not just elephants as well. They're dealing with extreme drought, flooding. Climate change is really hitting the equator very hard. But they deal with pests. They deal with other crop raiders. They deal with carnivore conflicts. They have
carnivore
hyenas,
livestock, right?
Yeah,
Conflicts. Yeah.
You have hyenas coming into the same villages trying to eat goats and chickens. So it's a big contentious kind of mess. So with the deterrent methods, that's one of the things we're trying to use to mitigate these events. And traditionally, people will go out with flashlights. They'll chase elephants, which is very dangerous for them.
Well, and isn't there also when you're trying to move elephants backwards, you have a helicopter, and you'll literally, don't they do the helicopter where they try and push herds back by flying them super low? I thought there was an IEF project about that. I thought I remember.
There may be, not in our area. We don't do that. Now, crop raiding is pretty much exclusively at night. Yeah. So you have people going out in the dark, facing down 7-ton elephants. Very dangerous. People can sometimes be killed. People will sometimes harm the elephants. And yeah, it's just a very dangerous thing to be doing. So we try to come up with ways that are people don't have to be there constantly in patrol at night, because there's a lot of other effects too. You have, the kids stay home from school. Farmer doesn't get sleep at night. When he finally does doze off, maybe he dozed off in a watchtower and an elephant walked by. So in these different types of deterrents, what you want to have is something where, it's low maintenance. Elephants don't habituate to it. Farmers can actually afford and be able to erect these different types of deterrents. But there's many different ones. Some of the things we looked at were different chili fences. Those have had variable success in Africa and Asia, all the way.
What is a chili fence, Lynn? Could you talk about what that is? Yeah.
I just act like everybody knows what one is.
Yeah, everyone knows what a chili fence is. Yeah.
Okay, so chili peppers are a crop that grows pretty easily in Africa. But what you do is you ground up as hot of chili peppers as you can find. You mix those with motor oil, and then you take this paste and you soak rags in it or cloths. And then you take and string twine up around whatever you're trying to protect. And then you hang these square pieces of cloth from those ropes. So essentially, it's a big square of cloth that's been inundated with this chili pepper and motor oil mixture, and it hangs about where it would be to the face of an elephant. So when an elephant walks up to it, this cloth maybe, flapping in the wind. So it should really get this noxious odor coming off of those cloths, akin to like maybe a light spray of pepper spray. Now, that was one of the interesting things in our study. That was not one of the most efficient deterrents. There have been some studies where they've been 100% effective. So there's a real variation in that type of technique.
And that's the issue with a lot of people think human wildlife conflict or human elephant conflict is simple, but wherever you are in Africa, it's completely different. And so I think one of the common examples I've used is with pumpkins, right? Where in some places planting pumpkins has led to more crop rating, and other places it's led to less crop rating. And so some people that were in my class did a study on that, and it's literally completely different results in just two different, and I think they might have actually been border nations. So it's really interesting.
It can also be very population specific too. But like in Asia, chili fences sometimes don't work well because they get so much rain it washes off. I suspect in our area we have a very windy environment. It may be that it dried the chili cloths too much. So that's one of the methods that we've tried out.
And just to let chat know, Lynn and I, we work with African elephants. In a few weeks, or maybe next week, Chase will be joining us, who works a lot with Asian elephants. So I actually have never worked with them before. Lynn, I don't know about you, but I've never actually done anything with any Asian elephants.
I have not gotten to either. My focus has mainly been on African elephants, but Chase and I actually spar back and forth all the time, jokingly, about which species is better. So
I will agree with you. African elephants are so much better. So this is a space where we both believe that.
You better hope he's not watching.
Even if he is watching, that's fine. I would say that to his face. So tell us about bee fences. I think this is so cool.
Yeah, very cool. One of the other deterrents that we looked at, Dr. Lucy King and her team at Save the Elephants is actually nearby our study area in Sagala. And she pioneered this deterrent effort. It can be up to 80% effective. The great thing about Beehive Fences is you also get some income for the farmers if they're able to harvest honey. But how those are set up, is really interesting discovery, and also another thing to mention about, community involvement, indigenous knowledge. People that live in Africa forever have known that elephants are afraid of bees. And she just kind of took that idea and ran with it and created a fence out of it. So you actually string live beehives on a fence surrounding whatever crop you want to protect. And when an elephant walks up to the fence, it kind of hits a tripwire on the fence, and it causes the beehives to shake. And henceforth, the bees come out and will sting.
And Lieutenant Hobbit, just to answer your question, yes, Beehive Fences. We are talking about bees and elephants.
Yes, elephants are afraid of bees. And I'm sure that's going to be the next question, is why are they afraid of bees? They're so big. They have such thick skin. Well, obviously, they have evolved together. But this bee species in Africa is Apis mellifera scutellata. And I can definitely tell you that they are slightly more aggressive than the European honeybees that we have here in Europe.
And in the American ones as well, in the Georgian honeybees.
Apis mellifera was brought over with the colonists, really. So actually, the bees that we use for honey production here in the U.S. are not native. They're introduced bees. But that's a whole nother podcast. But bees will actually go out and try to sting an elephant on its sensitive parts. So they will go for the eyes, and they'll go for the trunk. So imagine if a bees were to fly up your trunk, which is your nose and how you breathe, and started stinging you and made your nose swell up. So, I mean, it could be deadly for an elephant if it got attacked by, an entire swarm of bees. So elephants have evolved alongside bees to know that you don't want to be stung by a whole bunch of bees. So, amazing behavioral connection there.
Well, and I was just going to say, one of the things to kind of think about in this regard, too, is a lot of people look at the trunk and, like, from my side, the outside is super thick and you have this super dense skin that's a
Mhm.
protective layer. But right, I mean, if you look at the inside, elephants, it's filled with snot. It's literally
Yep.
just like a normal nasal passage
Mhm.
that humans have, and it goes all the way up their trunk. And so, yeah, and think about also bees can actually fly all the way up, and you imagine if your nose was like 3 meters long,
Right.
and so bees can get, like, if you've gotten a COVID test, they can basically get all the way to where they stick the Q-tip. But sorry, keep going about the fences
No,
and
that
things.
was a really good point. I mean, and so that's the reason why, they've even done some studies where they will play sounds of bees, and elephants have a special signal. They leave. So that's
And
why those
it's
fences are so effective.
yeah, and they've done them on elephant collars. And so for those that are interested, literally what you do is you take a motor and you usually tune the motor to a frequency of bee wing beats. And
Hmm.
that is actually another thing that drive. And so there's a lot. I think there's honestly a ton of part about bees. I know that there's also been where they made the alarm pheromone, right? And they
Hmm.
put it in a sock, and it was elephants were afraid of chat. So imagine this: they literally basically filled a sock with the alarm pheromone bees um, produce, and they put the sock in front of a tree, and the elephants avoided that tree like the plague. I mean, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. And another fascinating elephant fact, one of the reasons that's so effective is elephants have chemosensory behavior, and they have probably the best smell of any mammal out there. So elephants can really distinguish between things. So it's really easy that they can smell that pheromone and know they should probably not be there.
And elephants can actually, we've talked about this before on the stream, but elephants can actually uh, sniff TNT and be bomb detectors at a better rate than dogs.
Hmm.
So some of the, at Sean's place, Lynn, they were able to see that elephants avoided on some of the borderlands where there was minefields. They were avoiding certain areas,
Oh,
and
wow.
they would never actually step on any of the landmines. And so then they looked at, are elephants able to actually detect these subtle differences between things like TNT? So it's pretty. I want to get to a quick question we had of the elephants in danger from the stings. So I think you talked some about this. Can they like die from bee stings?
There's never been any reports that we're aware of. I know in Dr. King's work, they've never had an incident where an elephant was seriously injured. Like I said, this is like an kind of an ancient evolution. So as soon as an elephant either smells the pheromone or hears bees, they're out of there. So I don't know of any instances where we've actually had an elephant be stung. I'm sure they have been, but so far that it's there's no real risk to the elephant other than it scares them off really well.
And I think what we need to mention here is like, what is a learned behavior? Because this is something that I think comes up with this is, and I maybe I'm wrong about this, Lynn, but I don't think we actually know if the bees are technically, I don't know if anyone's investigated if basically over time, right, you invade a beehive, you get stung, and it's kind of like putting your hand in the fire, right? You kind of learn to not do that because you're going to get stung, or do people
Yeah.
actually know if it's learned or not?
I would say with bees in particular, um, there's going to be an elephant that's experienced that before. A lot of the challenge in deterrent work is elephants learn very quickly. So like with chili fences, like they can actually figure out, well, maybe if I just go around, I don't rub against something, maybe I can figure out a way around this. That's part of the challenge is they're so smart, they can figure things out. With the beehive fences, I think it's an innate fear, but there's also that combination of learned behavior. So if you have four elephants and one of them is a young bull and he's 14, maybe he's never been around a beehive, maybe he's never heard the sound of bees, but his buddy might be 30 and he's had several encounters with bees. So he's going to follow his lead and not get into a situation where he's going to be around bees. So I think it's probably a combination, but I think it's like I said, an ancient relationship where they kind of know better at this point.
Well, and this is, I think, something that's so fascinating about what we were talking about in one of our previous calls, which was like about problem individuals,
Hmm.
right? And because that's one of the things you're really interested in, right? In this, and actually tomorrow we'll have a guest on to talk about using like machine learning and artificial intelligence to like do the re-identification of camera traps and stuff. But I think it's cool to think about, so are these elephants that are always, especially it's bulls, right? Mainly bulls that are they, is it the same problem individuals that are always doing the crop rating? Oh, is it your cat or your husband?
Yeah, we're about to have a cat in the screen, but she decided to go a different direction. So
Sure.
that's one of the things that is very interesting about this type of behavior. Is it fully learned? Crop rating can be opportunistic. If an elephant happens to be in an area and they see this is Florence, everybody say hi.
Hi, Florence.
um, so if they happen to be in an area, obviously, and they see some corn, sure, they're going to investigate things like that. So it can just be opportunistic. But also, you see that a lot of the crop raiders are older bulls. So they have actually, you start to see a difference with personalities there. That's why you don't see in our area a lot of family groups raiding. Because they are cognizant that crop raiding is a dangerous behavior. So they're not going to take young ones around where they may have a farmer chasing them. But you start to see sometimes that you have older bulls mixed with younger bulls. So, it is kind of hypothesized that this is somewhat of a taught behavior because some elephants never crop raid.
Yeah, and with the elephant crop rating and some of these sort of things, another cool thing about the bee fences is once they realize those bees
Mm-hmm.
are there because of memories, yeah, so they avoid it in the future, and that's some of the stuff you've heard. Yeah, that's kind of the learned behavior. So we had a question earlier that I think we should have started this, but what are the differences between African and Asian elephants? So I guess I can start in talking about, I mean, in the trunk alone, one of the biggest differences is African elephants have basically two fingers, so they almost have like an opposable thumb where they have two fingers on the tip of their trunk, whereas an Asian elephant, one of those is purely cartilage. So they're actually only able to kind of wrap like this, whereas an African elephant can do different things. And I'm actually not sure, like evolutionarily, that reason. Maybe Lynn, but do you want to talk some about some of the other differences between the two?
Sure. I mean, if you have some more, go ahead because
I
there's
I, I
there's a
there's
bunch that
so
neither one
many.
of us will get.
I mean,
um,
yeah, yeah. You go ahead and then.
African elephants are much bigger, and we probably should bring up too that there actually is a third species of elephant. Stealing the show here. There's African savanna elephants. There's often also African forest elephants. Now, they are not technically recognized by the IUCN as a separate species, but there has been ample genetic evidence to show that forest elephants are indeed a separate species. They're slightly smaller than African elephants. They have tusks that point down. But we'll focus on the two main groups. But African elephants are much bigger. That's their very different ear shape. Most African elephants have tusks. With Asian elephants, smaller size, more rounded forehead. You will see that a lot of the females do not have tusks. Some of the males also don't have tusks as well. This is probably more of Chase's department. The toe configuration is slightly different.
Different, yeah.
Um, Asian elephants tend to have more splotches on the ears, which is a little bit easier way to identify them. Let's see.
I can I can do one that's super specific. So African elephant trunk skin, if you look at actually like the epidermis of their skin, is cracked to allow help with thermoregulation or
Yes.
getting rid of heat. And so they throw mud, sand, water, anything they can find, and it gets trapped in these cracks to cool them down. However, Asian elephants are in humid enough environments that they don't actually need that, so their skin does not have those cracks. So it's kind of a cool difference between the two. But
I wonder if that's the same with the vein patterns because in African elephants, one of the ways that we can identify them, besides the different markings on there, is the vein patterns in their ear. They're really prominent. So I'm just trying to think of if elephants have the same thing.
So chat, just to visualize this. So if you look at an elephant, an African elephant flapping its ear, and you take a picture of the back of an ear, it's basically a fingerprint. So every single elephant will have this distinct pattern that you can see in their ear. So that's what and part of this, but I think it's a real like I've heard, I think there was actually a paper on this I need to find, but basically that is actually only like 10% of their thermoregulation. So it's so small, they think if an elephant didn't flap its ears it wouldn't do much, but they pump blood through that and then they flap their ears and that helps them cool, for those of you that aren't aware of that. So, but sorry I interrupted.
No, that's okay.
Are elephants a necessity to our ecosystem or to the ecosystem of their respective countries?
Yes.
In a word. So, or territories.
Yes.
Do you want to? So again, this is a great question, Lieutenant Hobbit. I think you should ask Chase again on the Asian side, because Lynn and I. But why don't you start, Lynn, and then I can add anything. On like, what do they do?
Well, and just to go back a little bit, because we did skip a bit on the deterrents. Just real quickly, we have a metal strip fence that we actually tested and looked at. And there's several different other types of mitigation methods, and we're not going to go through them all here, of course. But just keep in mind that, it's really important to understand that there's a whole toolbox of different types of deterrent efforts, mitigation methods that you can use, and that's some of the work that I'm trying to do, and many other conservationists are as well, is that, customize plans, within each community to see what their needs are and figure out and try to tailor a mitigation plan for that community. Now, on to that really, really important question. And this is kind of one of the most important things why elephants are so important to conserve. So two main things. They're keystone species, and they're also ecosystem engineers. And this could be a whole hour conversation.
But let's start with, I talked some about the ecosystem engineering yesterday, but let's talk some about keystone species.
Okay. So keystone species are essentially, they really impact the different floral and faunal composition wherever they are. So if you removed elephants or a different type of keystone species, you might see trophic cascades or even eventual ecosystem collapse, because they are so vital to that ecosystem. A really good example with elephants is they are amazing seed dispersers. So they do not digest most of what they eat. So a lot of the seeds that they consume passes right through their digestive tract and ends up in that dung bolus. So you can go kick apart some elephant dung, which is usually nice and dry, and look inside and see all the seeds. You can go back a few days later and the dung will have actually sprouted. So not only do they disperse seeds through the forest that way, also a lot of species depend on those seeds. You'll see birds coming behind them, threshing apart the dung to eat the different seeds, which then they'll disperse. You also have entire insect communities that will live inside those dung boluses, things like that.
And to kind of talk more on this is, right, some of the best fertilizer that exists naturally is in dung. So when you look at this, just in addition to, I mean, you said if you go a few days later, but it's and I know people have actually done this, it's a incredibly nutrient rich environment for any of this sort of botany or animals or plants, insects, all those sort of things. So yeah, I think it's just so amazing, the things that, something as simple and chat, just all we've talked about right now is dung. Like, that is it in terms of the advantage that they have on the ecosystem. So what else, if you want to finish on that and go into some other things, Lynn?
Sure. So what was the one I was just coming to mind? So they have a real impact on how, they forage on trees. So a lot of times they will knock down trees, either in their foraging routine, or males tend to show off. They will go and they will just knock over a tree just to show you that they're kind of a badass. So when they do that, elephants can be responsible for conversion from forest to savanna. So when you see lots of elephant in areas that are foraging, they can actually change the composition, of the ecosystem in itself.
And isn't it also, and I mean, we're just talking about like the ability for them to change ecosystems, but when also they knock down the trees, right? Animals that can't necessarily climb, can't reach the leaves or some of the nutrients, right? Can also be, and like birds can't like fly up, right? They can also, eat food and they can forage
Yeah.
themselves on some of these things that are out of their reach, especially but the other thing that I talked a little bit about yesterday was their footprints. So
Mm-hmm.
like the
Habitat.
yeah, so do you want to talk some about the microhabitat of their footprints?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was just going to say. There
Yeah.
is, a lot of times in these areas, if it's wet, their footprint will leave a big depression, and you can have different, communities that can have just a little micro habitat there. Um, and that kind of, and then you start going into the ecosystem engineer part of it as well, with them creating wallows, and things like that. And they dig with their trunks and their tusks, so they can modify the habitat that way.
Well, and if you have a visual hard time with this chat, what's important is like think of Jurassic Park, and we talked about this some yesterday. But right, the giant footprint that I mean is coming from a 5-ton animal, right, is able to leave a divot in the ground that can fill up with water. It can do all of these sort of things in making this microhabitat, microecosystem. I mean, it's just really cool. Are there any
Yeah.
others?
Well, it's important to clarify on that one because, again, there's a whole thing about elephant feet and elephant communication. But elephant feet are really flat. So if it's just dry, all it leaves a footprint. So if it gets really wet and they're like in a water hole or they're in an area, that's when you'll start to see that depression of the footprint. Um,
Yeah, and I mean, elephant feet are fascinating too because they actually are kind of like treads. So you have these grooves and these sort of things. And I think Chase has done some specific stuff on elephant feet because it's a big thing in zoological settings is making sure elephants get good foot care. And
mhm.
so I've actually gotten to give an elephant a pedicure before, which was kind of exciting. But yeah, but it's some of the things that they do for the environment. And to be honest, I mean, we just mentioned, I guess, two or three, but there's definitely a lot of things that we probably don't even know
Mhm.
as well that they're actually doing for the environment, and some things that we could, yeah, again, we could talk about these things for hours, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so why did you choose to focus on African elephants versus Asian elephants? Um,
Uh,
I guess I can go first because I have like a physics reason, not in a like a I don't know, what would it be, speciesist version. I so African elephants' trunks are just mechanically and from a perspective a lot more interesting because in engineering, one of the things, or in just if you've ever, so chat, what I want you to think about is live your entire life without opposable thumbs for a day and see all the things that you can't do. One of the hardest things is getting toilet paper. I mean, there's like you can't grab things like pens and keys, and I mean all of that stuff becomes really oh, see, I use my thumb, but it becomes really challenging. And so African elephants with having these two fingers on the tip of their trunk are, I would say, a more mechanically interesting species, versus Asian elephants. Now, with this being said, there's some discrepancy, I guess, between the species. So, like for instance, cognition. I think we're gonna have Josh Plotnick on in a few weeks, and basically, there have been almost no cognition studies done with African elephants. Almost all are done with Asian elephants. That's not completely true, but the vast majority is on that side. So that's why I work with African elephants. My biased version is they're just better. So that's why I study them. I but they're and then finally, so a lot of the experiments I do are with zoological housed elephants at Zoo Atlanta. And so we have one 30-year-old male and two 37-year-old females that are all at Zoo Atlanta. And so it's more accessible species for me to do experiments with, and I mean, they're all elephants are so smart. And I guess the last thing I'll mention before turning it over to Lynn is it's funny that you mentioned the whole like how smart they are, because I remember we were trying to do a training session for figuring out like how accurate elephants are for smelling, so olfaction. Like how are they better at olfaction or sight, these sort of things. And for mice, just for everyone's like comparison, it took them I think 2 weeks to train them. And so one of the things I talked with this was like, hey, we should put up some cameras, see how fast they learn. And the head keeper was like, Andrew, it's literally going to take 45 seconds. And
Yeah.
I was like, what? There's no way. We set up GoPros and it took 45 seconds or like maybe a minute. But it was like, cool. Well, we're done here. So they're just miraculously and almost frustratingly intelligent a lot of the time. So,
Hmm.
so what about you? Why African elephants over Asian elephants?
Well, I would love to work with both species, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was more opportunistic. The position was in Africa. Honestly, I've dreamed of Africa since I was a teenager. So if I probably had to choose, I might have chosen to go to Africa, um, you know, first. But I would still like to work with Asian elephants as well. But right now, it's just a matter of that's where the project has been established, and that's where I'm set to go. But who knows in the future?
Yeah, I would love to work with both of them too. I mean, what I would it's so both of them are such incredible species, and it's just really it would be really cool. Yeah, so I mean, I feel blessed that I get to work with elephants in general.
Me
So
too.
it's a really cool species to study overall, and I think with there's so much left to discover, and
Mhm.
it's always fascinating to me because as an elephant researcher, everyone's always like, that hasn't been done yet for elephants. And you're like, no, like there's not. I mean, I would say like if you compare them to, right, elephants are a lot harder to study than goldfish, right? That's just
Yeah.
kind of that's just kind of the nature of it. And so before we transition into Lieutenant Abbott's question, Lynn, I'd like for you to just kind of describe some of like what is field work, because for a lot of people, myself included, that pre-field work, you don't really understand a little bit of like what is field work, what is a field season. I don't want to
Mhm.
bring up COVID, but just kind of talk about what field work looks like. With your research project, how long are you in the United States versus how long are you in Africa, and some of those different sort of things.
Sure. Well, there's two different crop rating seasons, two different planting seasons in Africa. It's pretty much opposite from here. So November till about February is one planting and harvest season, and that's the shorter rains, and the longer rains are from about April, May into June, July. There's been so much variation lately. It's really hard to pin down, but that's the approximate season. Sometimes the rains are late or early. It's just been, you can really see the effects of climate variability there at the equator. So we try to be there during those seasons so we can do our experiments looking at the different types of mitigation methods. But usually, my longest stint has been 8 months there, and then 6 months, 4 months. I was supposed to be there 3 months this year. Did not happen. Hoping to get back next year. But typically, I was talking about this with somebody the other day. Everybody's like, "Oh, working with amazing elephants is the most amazing experience. Like every day must be like a dream." And it's like it is. It absolutely is, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. But it's also really hard work
Yeah.
because you are in a very isolated desert climate. You can't just run out to the store and get something if you need it. The closest hospital is an hour away. You have to think about water all the time. You have to deal with vehicles constantly breaking down because of the dust. I'm not adapted to, noon at the equator like somebody from there is. So you have to be really careful about when you work outside and how long, because you can get dehydrated really easy. Um, there's a massive amount of data coming in, so you have to stay on top of that. In addition to being out in the field, you have language barriers sometimes, which I've being able to mostly overcome by getting Swahili. You have vehicle breakdowns constantly.
Well,
But
and the thing for me is that I think is kind of difficult is as a scientist, I think what a lot of people do, traditional scientists, you go, you collect data, you interpret data, you figure out what's the next step, and you're not always able to, have 4G wireless, and you're like, oh yeah, let me just run some of these simulations here and some of that stuff. So you kind of have to collect and then sometimes come back and interpret, and that's why field seasons are so long, right? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like this constant data collection, and then then you have to, you definitely, there's less amenities, so you have to work harder there. I don't have an oven, so I've got to cook something from scratch. I got to take a few minutes to get the snake out of the ceiling. Internet's gone at 10 p.m. Some days we lose internet. If we have 3 days of rain, the solar may be out. So again, I wouldn't trade it for the world, but you have so many different things to think about in a field season, in the remote bush versus you do in a lot of other places.
Well, and I know this sounds so weird, but could you talk some about like what is I hear this term all the time, and I say this term now all the time, but like what is the African bush? Like what is that phrase to you? How would you describe, like, if you're like, oh yeah, I'm going out in the bush today or something? Because you hear that all the time when you're in the field, and then you come back, and you're like, oh, it was amazing in the bush, and people are like, what are you saying?
What's the bush?
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, it's obvious it's very different from the Australian bush and the African bush. So, I think when people say the bush, they're generally talking about some place that's very remote. I don't say I'm going out into the bush if I'm headed to one of the nice lodges somewhere. But it's a mixed acacia comifera is kind of the forest that's there, and it's interspersed with savanna where you have grasslands. And most of the time, the bush, is very variable in rainfall. You have real distinct seasons there most of the time, maybe 7 to 8 months out of the year. It's very dry. And then you have a few months after the rains come when it's really one of the most amazing things to watch is within a week, you'll go from completely dry, not a spot of green, to everything being in full bloom.
Yeah.
It's really pretty amazing. So you get to watch that transformation. And another thing is having to deal with mud where vehicles don't usually like to go. But yeah, bush life is very, very unique, and it's also extraordinarily beautiful.
Yeah, and yeah, just being in the field is so different than what a lot of people have experienced before. And I think for me, my first field season, it's a lot shorter than yours have been, but you gain you I don't want to say like you live life differently when you come back to the States, but kind of, right? Some yeah, is
You absolutely do.
You things just change all the time, and you're almost ready for anything. Like, oh, the power went out. Okay, it's not that big of a deal. And like there these things that are sometimes just so like sudden. It's like, oh yeah, I know how to deal with that. I've dealt with that like 15 times before, or these sort of things. Because but I think it's that you glossed over it really quickly, but you talked about the snake in the roof. And the other part to remember is there are, and this isn't completely true, but there are animals that like could eat you that are where you are, which is yeah. Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you cut out for just a second.
Oh, yeah, sorry. But yeah, the whole aspect of having animals that are carnivores and are apex predators, and you are not we are not if you're out there by yourself and like on foot, which I don't think you were probably ever doing that, but or were you? I actually don't.
Sometimes, most of the times I'm actually driving a vehicle through the bush. So, you never get around elephants on foot. That's one thing to make clear is we're always in a vehicle. We do some tree transects. When we do that, we have 2 rangers that actually scout the area for us. before we start getting out, and they keep watch while we're out on foot. Because you do have, where we're at, we have lions, cheetah, all the different carnivores as well. So yeah, I mean, and that's the interesting thing too, is when you're there, you're kind of on like this state of high alert, because you have to deal with snakes and scorpions, and you can't just reach somewhere blindly like you can in the States. You can't just put your shoes on. You have to shake them out and make sure there's no scorpions there. So
and the snakes,
yeah,
just to let people, so like in South Africa there was black mambas, and so
big,
you're not dealing with like, oh yeah, we have corn snakes in the US too, and it's like, so one of my favorite, this maybe it's not a joke, but it was like, if you're in the bush and you get bit by a black mamba, what do you do? And the joke is you get a six pack of
die.
beer. You get a six pack of beer. You find the nearest tree and you tell your life story. And but right, the danger level of things, people don't realize the
Yeah.
difference of, everyone's not prepared at a moment's notice to, oh yeah, Lynn, let's hop in, let's hop in the truck, then let's drive an hour to so and so, and if you're out, right, it's even further, and there's just all of these different sort of things. So when you hear like, oh, I gotta check for snakes, scorpions, these aren't like, oh, look how nice the scorpion is. So I mean, they, with black mambas, I mean, there's kind of in a lot of the places, there's like shoot on sight, um things for, if you see a black mamba in some of the like human habituated areas, or some of them it was like shoot on sight if they're close to people, because yeah, if you get bitten, grab a six pack and tell your life story. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have puff adders there as well, which are and spitting cobras, and we
Not a
have
lot of nice snakes.
yeah, but I mean, luckily, all the snakes that I've had close encounters with have been harmless snakes. I think last year I got really used to just like having snakes in my ceiling, because I think I had like 4 last time I was there. But you get it's amazing the things you get used to. That's kind of one of my favorite things about Africa, is it's kind of made me fearless. Because I may wake up one night and there's an elephant out back and I have to chase it off with a flashlight, or you're in a dead sleep and a lion walks behind your house and wakes you up, and we have a fence in the camp I'm at, so I'm not in any kind of danger.
Well, that's
And,
just, I just want to,
yeah,
like, I don't want to like repeat you, but literally just think about that. If you were chilling in your apartment right now and then you woke up and instead of like a fire alarm, you heard a lion, right? And so that's a little bit of the difference. Oh yeah,
yeah,
they are loud. And yeah, I think it's just, I mean, I think field work, and it's interesting because on Thursdays, Lynn, I have some people on here and we talk about like conservation technology, and one of the things we talked about in like the first episode before we started recording stuff 2 weeks ago was the fact that if like every engineer or every scientist, computer scientist, etc., could experience a field season, the difference they would have of, oh, hey, I'm going to make a camera trap that's 450 pounds, and you're going to have to ship 8 of them, but it's going to work, and you just plug it into a car battery, and and it's like, you just need to go experience what that would actually be like to implement, and the technology would actually be thinking more of the end user and those sort of things in mind. But yeah, don't want to
mm,
get bogged about that. So Lieutenant has to ask a great question in chat: is understanding that are vital keystone species and vital to ecosystem, why do you think there's been a significant lack of an effort to protect them? So we'll start with that.
well, I wouldn't say there has been lack of effort, but I would say that it's been an almost insurmountable problem because of the price of ivory. Elephants are declining mainly because of ivory poaching, habitat loss and fragmentation, and now human elephant, negative human elephant interactions. But the poaching crisis, I mean, like in Kenya, wiped out almost 90% of the population. You've had these big industrial efforts coming in, and that's one thing you'll find is it's usually not the majority of the time the local people that are killing elephants. It's usually more these big conglomerates of foreign nationals coming in and trying to get ivory. But the price of ivory is still, I believe, more than the price of gold. So you have, it's just simply a money making opportunity for people that, for criminals who did not understand, the vital importance of the species. And when I say that, I mean in the more recent, decades. You'll have people coming in with choppers and machine guns. Now, historically, historically, you will see, people killing it for the ivory for piano keys and for ornamentation and things like that. But the population has just been decimated. I mean, I think it's around 400,000 now is all the elephants that are left. They're declining at about 8% per year.
And it's 90% in the last, is it 80 years now? Because it used to be 100 years, and then it was 90 years, and then I think it's 90% of the population is in the last 80 years, because it was 4 million.
Since the 80s and 90s, they've lost 90% of the population. I'd have to look it up for the entire continent.
I think for entire continent, we're at 80 years, 80 and it just keeps, right, because it's exponential decay, right? It's not, and so it keeps getting worse and worse, right? Because the elephants but the statistic is, what is it? Is it an elephant is it 3 minutes? Or it's something
higher than 3. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, 7 minutes. It's something in that range of.
It's really bad. It's not sustainable if we don't do something. They're not going to be around for our grandkids. They're not.
Yeah, and unless we. And the other part is, I think you touched on it, but I really don't think the issue is with the significant lack of effort to protect them. A lot of the issue is so elephants are intelligent, humans are very intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
Poachers are not dumb, right? So and so when you think about these, so I don't know how many people were at where you stayed, but say that you're covering 1,000 acres. Right. Mm-hmm. There might be a few people and hundreds of elephants on. And so, right, like the aspect of tracking everything, and we've talked about this before on the stream, but you want to talk some about the vultures and like poisoning vultures and those sort of things, the reduction of the vulture population? Do you know what I'm talking about with that?
Yeah. So all vulture species are critically endangered in Africa, mainly because of poisoning of any type of animal they would dine on. So elephants in particular. So if someone poisons an elephant, and vultures get there to feed on the carcass. I mean, there have been some major vulture die-offs last year or this year. I can't remember the month that happened in. Time has no meaning anymore. So, so you start to see these populations of vultures declining because they're feeding on contaminated meat that's been poisoned. So that's been a real problem throughout Africa. So we're losing our vulture species as well.
And right, the I guess the timeline of this a lot of times is poachers will kill a smaller piece of game, right, and then poison that. The vultures in that area will eat the poisoned meat, so then they're not doing their circling for their scavenging, and then they can because that's a big sign of poaching is vultures. So you eliminate that.
It's like an indicator.
That the indicator, the warning sign, right? And so when you think about, I mean, this is what's nuts about this is it's not a singular problem with just protecting African elephants. It's a big problem for a lot of different wildlife in the African bush. I mean, it's if you look at almost all mammals outside of hoofstock, right, they're almost all on the IUCN red list, right, in Africa. like in terms of
Yeah,
excluding.
in one
Yeah,
form or another. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
They're
And
endangered or threatened or declining.
vulnerable. There's all the I again I don't want to get too bogged down in all the naming conventions and stuff. So I'll usually hear or read is how their numbers are declining. One would think there would be increase in numbers, but it's always rather depressing. So yeah, and I think another aspect of this is, like you said earlier, studying elephants is hard work. And one of the things with research is I think a lot of people study, I don't want to say easy species, that's an exaggeration, but right, is it's sometimes a lot easier to look at some smaller mammals or those sort
More
of
accessible.
things, more accessible.
Yeah.
And it's, I guess the reason I'm talking about this is it's so funny to me because when I do some of my research studies, um, a complaint I'll get, and I've actually talked to Dr. Plotnick about this, is it's like, well, your sample size is so small. Like I read this mice or monkey paper that had 15, and it's like, well, okay, but like there's mice that are bred to be studied, and we're
Yeah.
studying something that is quite literally a threatened to be extinct. I think it's is it right now, is it 2055, 2065 with the, I forget the decay because I haven't looked at this in like a year, but what is the estimate for elephants to be extinct? I thought I For African, it's different for African and Asian elephants. I know that, and I'm sure all the numbers are messed up now with COVID. So I'm
2040.
2040. Yeah. So y'all think about that. That's that's not even that's not even grandchildren for me. That's
No.
that's
That's,
children.
yeah.
So
Um,
it's yeah, it's
well,
sad.
and on that subject of why aren't they increasing? It is interesting that you see this variation across Africa by country and by region. So overall, they are declining, but you see some pockets of Africa where they're actually increasing, and the increases become problematic for those countries.
Botswana, yeah.
So, for example, Kenya, where I work, the population is slightly increasing. They've got a really good handle on poaching. Things are improving there with their elephant populations. But as that happens, elephants are trying to move back into some of their historical ranges, and there's somebody's house there. So you've got an increasing human population that is kind of taking over space that elephants were once in. So these areas where elephants are recovering, you're starting to have more conflict. And then you also have, Kenyan elephants are mostly migratory populations. But then you look at some of the populations in South Africa that are in fenced parks, where they have low predation from poachers, and then since they're in a confined area, they're having an overpopulation of elephants within that area because it's a bit difficult to control the populations. Botswana has, I think, the largest elephant population as well that continues to grow. So it's very region specific. So it's really frustrating to watch that we know we're losing elephants overall, but you've got some countries that are trying to manage the population growth. So it's really interesting to see that kind of unequal dynamic.
Interestingly, I think it's almost similar to COVID regulations in the United States, right? Where every single state is doing different things, right? It's like state regulated.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, when you look at and the challenge to this, as we talked about earlier, is this isn't uniform to, right, like conservation methods are not uniform to one area, right? It changes from area to area because there's different ways to mitigate the human elephant interactions and those sort of things depending on where you are in Africa. But yeah, it's fascinating to just think about because I mean, Africa's also so big, right? So a lot of I study pandas as well, and what's kind of so interesting is when you look at the difference between the species, right? The pandas they're so small in terms of their habitat that's still exist in Chengdu, China, and it's so small, right? It's almost easy to figure out if you're doing things like reintroductions, conservation, right? You have like this tiny area, and that's why they're on the increase, right? But this same sort of stuff happened, and it's so vast of where they are. But I mean, they are extinct or nearing extinct in some countries,
Yeah,
right? Yeah. Um,
they've been they've been extirpated from many African countries. I mean, um, I wish I had a range map to show you how their range has shrunk, and that's Asian and African elephants. I mean, their habitat range is just a fraction of what it once was.
yeah. I mean, and that's I would say, unfortunately, a really common case throughout the world for
Yeah.
mammals.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I kind of like say that for mammals, right, is habitats for now it's kind of the same thing for if you're like a lake dwelling, but like if you think of habitats for something like a bird, right, you're not super limited by range in terms of because of migratory patterns and things like that, and some of those things might shift. Same thing with fish, right, is maybe if you're in the Atlantic Ocean, you're still in the Atlantic Ocean. But yeah, I mean, definitely you just see some of this, and there's maps that you can find chat that are like over the years, so it will be like 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, and like some of these things I'm not sure if they're there for elephants, but IUCN has some of those for a bunch of different species where you can see the observed, and not all of those are super accurate. They might actually be worse because there's not a ton of the what elephant or censuses, right, of where the species are located. So, um,
The last big one was in 2017 by Dr.
yeah,
Chase. That's with out of Botswana, and he did the Great African Elephant Census. So that's where that last number comes from. And I think he just released a study as well showing that we are still seeing a huge impact from poaching.
yeah.
It has been declining in a lot of areas, but overall, that's still one of the greatest threats for elephants.
Yes, and that's as you said, has a lot to deal with like the price of ivory, right? Obviously, if there's no demand for that, and actually, there's been a lot of, I dare I say, like good things on that side of that have been impacted by COVID, right? In terms of illegal wildlife trade, there have been a lot of countries that have banned some things like that and exotic pets. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't stop everything. There's a reason it's illegal, right? There's a reason we talked about it yesterday, chat, but a reason that literally illegal wildlife trade is the fourth largest criminal enterprise. What is it behind drugs, sex trafficking, guns, and I believe it's the fourth. And so, in terms of wildlife, sorry, I say, um, but it's just in terms of wildlife crime, in terms of everything. But yeah, yeah. Have you ever worried about your safety, like threats from wild animals, human threats, as well as is there something that's in the back of your mind, or do you do enough research on the area prior to stepping in the zone? Um, no, I mean I guess my opinion is know what you know and know what you don't. So one of the important things for me is I don't when I go in the field, I listen and I realize that all of the advice that I'm getting could probably save my life in any sort of situation. So I don't assume, like, actually, Lynn, you talked about it perfect, like the not assuming, like when you reach for something, right? And so I think that's one of the important things for me. And I don't think, I mean, I had done some research beforehand and talked to some other people that had been in the field site I was at. But I mean, one of the really important parts was listening and always listening for if anything around you happens, you are not the smartest person that is there because there have been obviously people that have way more interaction and live in those areas, and I think But yeah, I felt not threat from a wild animal, just a kind of maybe a different sort of fear because yeah, obviously we talked about it some earlier, but there's carnivores that can do those things. So that, I mean, that is kind of an obvious thing for me. And then obviously getting charged by a bull, which I can't even probably I don't, you've experienced it so much more than I have, Lynn, but that is do you want to, I guess, talk about that before answering the question just about like bull charges?
Yeah, it's inevitable if you work around elephants pretty much. You do have to know how to drive around elephants, how to approach elephants. Um, there's two really like fundamental rules. Elephants don't like surprises, so it's good that they know you're there. You never want to come around a corner or drive up on an elephant and them not realize you're around because you'll get charged almost immediately. And two, you never want to separate a group of elephants, even if it's just bulls. Definitely with families, you're gonna get immediate aggression. But even if it's just some bulls that are hanging out together, they do not like to be separated. So those are kind of the two cardinal rules. But um, you know, if you're going to be around them, you're going to get charged eventually. Most of those are mock charges. I've never been fully actually charged where an elephant does not back down. Most of the time they're just giving you a good healthy warning, and you know how to safely and slowly either back away or what to do in that situation. Um, and as far as the other question about people, it's important to realize that we are still students. So usually any area that we're going to be in, it's going to be checked for safety. We always register with the Department of State, get the alerts in case there's any kind of terrorist activity or things like that. I know Chase did have to come home from Sri Lanka last year because of some of the terrorist attacks. He was in an area that was remote and fine, but they really keep pretty close tabs on us when we're out there. And they've done a lot of checking with locals and things like that. And I just have to say, like, the Kenyan people have been absolutely amazingly welcome. I usually have a Kenyan companion with me, but I've never felt unsafe in any of the villages. People just welcome you right into their home and give you some chapati and chai and not think twice about it. Kids run right up to you. So it's been a really, really safe environment. And as I said, in Kenya, the poaching is pretty low. There's not been any things with threats from that as well. So luckily on that end of it, it's been pretty calm.
Yeah, in South Africa, I mean, I don't think I've had any sort of safety in that. Are there any measures to ensure your safety? Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think you covered it. So, Guzagula asked, "Is Ivory's demand increasing or decreasing? Poachers are obviously a plague, but buyers basically created the poachers." So, I actually have no idea if like the demand is increasing or decreasing. The demand exists still. That is 100%. Lynn, I don't know if you have.
Well, China banning ivory was huge.
Yeah.
That's one of the best things that's happened. So let's hope that the demand actually decreases and doesn't just go underground at this point. That's not an area that I've worked in very much, so I'm sure there's somebody that could talk much more intelligently about that. But what's been fueling it is a lot of the Asian markets revere ivory as like a status symbol. When you achieve a certain point in life, you might have 3 or 4 ivory objects. So I think there's been a large push by a lot of celebrities and some of the governments to say, hey, this is killing elephants. This is not sustainable. These are just trinkets. It's not worth an elephant life.
And some of this we talked about yesterday, but like the US, right, you can still actually buy ivory that is from if you can, or sell ivory if it's pre 1990, correct? Right? If you can prove, yeah, and there's some just interesting policies.
I know you can still buy like historic pieces,
Yeah.
antiques. I don't know the year on that.
I think it's 1990 because it's when they were moved to Appendix 1 on CITES.
Okay.
Was I think when I don't actually know about Asian again. Of course, I'm only speaking from some of my experience with African elephants, but yeah, but yeah. Another question: how fast can they charge at full speed? Is it almost always avoidable?
Really fast. It's usually never avoidable because when you think about it, of course, it depends on how close you are. If you're in a vehicle and an elephant is coming directly at you, usually the best thing is to just keep the vehicle still, because it's probably a mock charge. Because if they do intend to hit you, you're not going to usually be able to back out of it or get away. On foot, and this is the problem, if I or somebody else were out, you have to think about if an elephant is coming after you, their stride length is so much bigger than yours. So for every, maybe 10 steps you take, take one. So you really can't outrun an elephant. You might be able to outmaneuver an elephant because obviously they've got such big body mass. You might be able to bob and weave in some trees where they might not be able to fit. But the best thing is don't get yourself in that situation to where you're going to have an elephant come after you.
I mean, and if there's a bull charging, there's not a lot that could
Yeah.
be between you and that bull. Y'all, Chad, I'm sure y'all have seen like the videos of elephants like overturning cars and stuff like that. There's not a lot of barriers that can get between you and a right. I mean, I think that's just kind of a reality.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, if you're in a vehicle, people don't die when they're in vehicles usually. It's when they do something dumb, like get out and try to take pictures of an elephant, like a tourist. Every year you see the headline, tourist from insert country here tries to take picture of elephant and gets killed. So, the main thing is people that aren't used to being around elephants don't realize that they can be deadly. So it's important that people need to learn that they have to follow their guides' instructions and things like that.
I yeah, I think with getting hit, and I'm seems you have only seen mock charges, but yeah, it's a little bit. I think a lot of people will see something and they'll make these assumptions, like you talked about at the very beginning. Oh, gentle giant. There's another. What's the other one? Is elephants look at human? Oh, this is the one that drives me insane. Is what is it? Elephants look at humans like like humans look at dogs. Have you heard that one? It's like it's just so it's like elephants think we're cute, and it's this I think it's this blog post that somebody made, and then I got a bunch of traction, it's just like no,
Not true.
that is so with all of this, people I think make these assumptions about all of these gentle giants, and a lot of those just are not true. They're magnificent megafauna, but not they are not always these
They're
cute.
wild animals.
Yeah, and that goes with the other common one is I think with African wild dogs, right? With the painted dogs, people are like, oh my gosh, it's just like a dog, and they're like, I have I've heard that a lot of people are like more afraid of them than hyenas, and I mean they're just, I mean because they hunt in the packs and all, but like again, it's just a lot of people are like, oh, it's just like a dog, and it's a wild animal, and even in zoological settings, you've for those of you that are here that have been on Maya's podcast, some of the zookeepers have talked about protective contact, which means you will not go into the same space that animal is, and that's how all elephants are in the United States since I think the 1980s, because I mean they are dangerous, and
Yeah.
they are. I don't know. I'm looking at my watch. I was trying to do a calculation of how much heavier they are than we are, but
Yeah. Well, and think about if an elephant were to hit you with its trunk, it could kill you. I mean, think about the fact that an elephant can pick up a lion and throw it with its trunk. And
you've gotten to see that before, haven't you?
No,
Did
not
you? No. I thought I might have
there's
remembered you
a
had a
book that
picture of
has
it.
that talks about that. I think
Yeah.
it may have been Phyllis Lee's book or Cynthia Moss's, but she talks about actually getting to see a lion that got cornered and an elephant just picked it up and you know, by
And lions are not small.
no,
Like
no,
and so we've done some rough calculations, but I believe they can swing their trunks at about 5G. So like
oh,
5 times the speed, or maybe it's 4G. And so right, if you think of so think about if just do a rough calculation. So you have a 200 kilogram trunk moving at you at 40 meters per second squared acceleration. That's a force hitting you that is about the equivalent of what, maybe a 30-mile-per-hour car crash.
mm, it's not.
No, maybe 40. I think that's like a pinpoint, right? It's not like a distributed force. That is a elephant thwacking you with a yeah, it's pretty nuts.
Well, a lot of times in zoos too, elephants may not even be intending to harm someone, but if an elephant backs up or moves and they don't realize you're there, they can crush you accidentally. I think that's happened a couple times where they just weren't aware that somebody was around them. They took a step or backed up and have crushed people. So yeah,
And
you do
yeah,
not mess with elephants.
wear a seatbelt when being hit by an elephant trunk. Thank you
Yeah,
for that. But
yeah.
if so, we have a few more minutes here, so about I think 9 more minutes, and we'll finish up. But Lieutenant Hobbit, if you had to put a percentage on the likelihood of elephants not hitting extinction level, what would be that number? So I think that's a really tough question because I think so. I think what right? I think that's a similar question to like if in March you put a percentage on like COVID, right? Some places have handled it really, really excellently, and and so I think the the elephant not hitting the extinction level ever, I'm not sure, but I think what has to happen is more people have to become educated. Less people have to be buying ivory. The market needs to basically be eliminated on that. We need to understand basically throughout Africa what sort of techniques can help reduce human elephant coexistence, or sorry, reduce human elephant having just difficulties in their interactions and negative interactions. I think educating and making sure that people everywhere understand that they're not always these gentle giants and appreciating them. I think there's a lot of things that need to happen, but I
Yeah.
have no way, shape, form, idea to generate a percentage because, I mean, we're talking about, if you think about COVID, think about how different COVID is every single week, every single month, 2 months ago, 3 months ago. I mean, if you look at the United States, um, by 2040, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I think a lot of people need to wake up.
If we do nothing by 2040,
Yeah, they'll be, yes,
but
I
there's a
would.
whole lot of people that aren't doing nothing.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I do believe that the communities of conservationists, you know, zoos, conservation organizations, everybody's really working together to make sure that this does not happen. Um, there's no guarantees, what's going to happen in the world, but you just got to know that there's a lot of people working really hard to make sure that that's not going to be the fate of elephants.
Yeah, and working hard to make sure that we are communicating and disseminating our science is one of the other really important parts, because when you look at a lot of these places that we're doing research in, there's tens, if not hundreds, of dialects that people speak, and it's really important to communicate that really effectively so everybody can understand um, all the different science that's going on all throughout Africa to kind of help us learn more and more about elephants. So yeah, how much does getting hit? How much does getting hit by an elephant? I'm assuming it's something you can live from. I think a lot of that stuff is like if you get hit with a fastball and it hits you in the foot, yes, you will survive probably. If an elephant hits you in a head full force with its trunk, I don't think there is a high likelihood of survival unless for some reason you have like a protective helmet on.
Yeah. I mean, and there's been instances where people have survived elephant attacks just by, rolling up. There's a real famous video of a scientist that got kind of charged quickly, and he managed to roll under the elephant and kind of survive. But I mean, it's hard to say every instance is going to be different. When elephants are attacking too, and they've got someone pinned down and they use their tusks, you're not going to walk away from that.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, there's some important things to remember when we think of these different things. So, and again, that's the whole a gentle giant, that if you surprise it, and I think that's, this is one of the things I want to ask Josh Plotnick when he's here, but the other myth that I get all the time is, are elephants actually afraid of mice? And yeah, I think we can dispel that one later. So you have a better chance waving and yelling than running away. So I think if an elephant's charging you, do you wanna talk about that, Lynn?
Well, if you're in a vehicle, that's a different situation. If you're far enough away from an elephant and you can see that you're getting too close or it's acting aggressively, you should slowly try to, back away or turn your vehicle. It's always a good thing if you're not trying to back up and reverse really fast. So if you're approaching an elephant group, you definitely want to do it to where you can speed away if necessary. But if you're out on foot and an elephant is there, yeah, I guess you're probably better, waving your arms and standing your ground and trying to move away slowly. But it's unpredictable. You just, if I tell you one thing, the opposite's going to happen. It's one of those situations where you can't be for sure. But if an elephant is standoffish and away, you don't want to just turn and run, because then they're going to chase after you. But I think it does need to be said that, all elephants are not aggressive. And it's really, it really differs by where you are. Like in Amboseli, I haven't got to go there, but there's been a scientific experiment there for decades. So you can drive really close to those elephants. They're usually gentle. You have very few incidences. But then you might be in an area where elephants have been, almost poached out, have had to deal with guns and things like that, and they could be much more aggressive than some other elephant populations. So one of the things, if you're a tourist, is your guide knowing what kind of environment you're in, or if you're a scientist, you've probably got some history or experience with the different types of elephants. And it also has to do with must, but we're going to leave must for Chase to talk about probably.
Yeah, because that is literally his PhD research. So, well, I think thank you so much, Lynn. I'm excited for us to kick this off and to talk to some different elephant scientists that we know throughout the world. This is, I think, talking with you, one of the coolest parts of COVID is we're all stuck in the U.S. So because we're all stuck in the U.S., everyone, well, not the U.S., everyone's stuck at home. So people are stuck in the U.S. and people stuck in Asia. We have people stuck in Africa. Everyone is everywhere. And so we'll have a lot of really great interactions and talk about different elephant science. So it should be really cool. Thank you. And yeah, there's Lynn. And so she got to learn Twitch today, y'all. So this was a learning experience. So we got to learn Twitch and Discord together. But yeah, thank you, Lynn. And I'll catch you later. And I'm gonna stay and talk to some to chat. So everybody say bye, Lynn. Bye.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Well, everybody, I thought that was awesome. So I thought that was so fun. Lynn is absolutely amazing. She has a lot of really cool elephant knowledge. Oh wow! Thank you, Lieutenant Hobbit, for the gifted sub. To let me run through these real quick. So There we go. Lynn followed the channel. Thank you, Lynn, for the follow. Arek Usu for the follow, and thank you, Lieutenant Hobbit, for the gifted sub to Lynn. So really do appreciate that. Yeah. Well, Hobbit with the sub. Yeah, she's really, really great. And new sub. There we go. I need to figure it out. So if people have longer names, but I think it was a really excellent conversation and a really great first start off. I know this is actually, it's so weird to me because Locke was able to talk with me for about an hour before the stream to help figure out all of the settings and all of the stuff for this microphone. So I hope you have enjoyed getting to hear things on the microphone. It was kind of nuts there because it was really cool. We got to start off and we had a amazing sound quality. Thank you very much. Yeah, we have, you can see there, got a Razer mic in the meantime. And then what I'm hoping to do is once we get some with some donations and some things like that, eventually get things hooked up for an XLR mic. So Lieutenant Hobbit, yeah, so what I'm going to try to do is, so Chase will also be joining me, so it'll be Lynn, Chase, and I. So Lynn and I both work with African elephants, and then Chase works, so I work with zoological housed African elephants in the United States, as well